The wind rolled low across the New Mexico plains, bending the dry grass like a warning whispered by the earth itself, and Elijah Crow felt that warning settle deep in his bones as he rode back toward his ranch at dusk, a place so lonely even the coyotes seemed to avoid it, a man-shaped silence clinging to every fence post and weathered board of his home. For Elijah was a rancher carved hollow by loss, a widower whose voice had forgotten how to sound inside walls meant for two. And that evening, as the sun bled red behind the distant mesas, he heard something that did not belong to the land's usual song, a sound that was neither animal nor wind, but pain, raw and trembling, carried on the breeze like a broken prayer. He dismounted slowly, hand near his rifle, not from cruelty but from habit, and followed the sound toward the cottonwoods near the creek where shadows gathered, thick and uncertain, and there, half hidden by reeds and blood-darkened mud, he saw her, a girl enormous in stature, taller than any man he had known. Her long black hair tangled with leaves, her skin marked with bruises and cuts, eyes dark and wide with fear and strength intertwined. She wore torn Apache garments, her chest rising in shallow breaths as she tried to pull herself away from a steel trap clenched around her ankle, the cruel jaws biting deeper with every movement. When Elijah stepped closer, the metal shifted under his boot and she cried out, voice cracking as she pleaded in broken English learned through suffering, "It hurts. Don't do that." And the words struck him harder than any bullet ever had, because they were not an accusation, but a desperate misunderstanding, a soul braced for harm, because harm was all it had ever known. He froze, palms open, voice low and steady as he told her he would not hurt her, though trust did not come easy in a land built on betrayal. And she flinched anyway, muscles tightening like a wounded horse ready to bolt. Elijah knelt slowly, showing her the trap, explaining with gentle patience what it was and how it worked, his hands shaking not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility, because in that moment he understood something sacred had been placed in his care. As he worked to pry the jaws apart, her breathing turned ragged, sweat beading on her brow, and she whispered again, softer this time, please. It hurts. And Elijah answered with action, bracing the trap with all his strength, until the metal snapped open and her leg came free, blood flowing but freedom following close behind. She collapsed, exhaustion overtaking her, and though every instinct told him to keep distance, he removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders, stepping back to let her decide. And after a long, fragile silence, she did not run. The moon rose, pale and watchful, as Elijah cleaned the wound with water from his canteen, and she watched his hands, as if memorizing the difference between cruelty and care. And in that quiet exchange, something ancient shifted, a bridge forming between two worlds long taught to fear each other. She told him her name was Ayanna, that her people had scattered after soldiers came, that she had been alone for days, surviving on roots and rain, and as she spoke, Elijah realized his loneliness was a shallow thing compared to hers, that his empty house was still a house, while she carried homelessness in her bones. When he offered her shelter for the night, she hesitated, pain flickering across her face, not from the wound, but from memory. Yet the cold crept in and her strength waned, and at last she nodded, trusting not the world, but the man who had knelt instead of towered. As they walked slowly toward the ranch, the stars blazing overhead like witnesses, Elijah felt something awaken inside him, a sense that this meeting was no accident, that the land itself had conspired to bring two broken lives together. And as the fire crackled later that night, and Ayanna slept near it, breathing at last in peace, Elijah looked toward the dark horizon and knew that whatever tomorrow brought, danger, judgment or redemption, he would face it. Because sometimes the West did not ask a man to conquer, only to choose kindness. And if this story already grips your heart, remember to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that compassion can still rise from the dust. Morning came slow and pale, sunlight spilling across the ranch like a cautious promise, and Ayanna woke with a sharp intake of breath. pain flashing through her leg before memory caught up and she realized she was alive. Warm and not alone. The wound bound carefully with clean cloth. The fire reduced to embers that still breathed heat, and Elijah sitting nearby, not watching her like a guard, but working quietly, mending a saddle as if her presence were no threat at all. She studied him with the careful attention of someone who had learned survival through observation, noticing how he moved with restraint, how he gave her space, how his eyes carried sadness rather than hunger. And when she tried to stand and winced, he rose instantly, steadying her with a hand she did not pull away from this time. Over the following days, news traveled fast as bad weather in the west, and whispers reached the ranch. Talk of an Apache girl seen near Crow's Land, men muttering about rewards, about fear, about old grudges that refused to die, and Elijah felt the noose of the world tightening. Yet he never once suggested Ayanna leave, because some choices once made defined a man forever. Ayanna grew stronger, helping where she could, her size and quiet strength turning heavy labor light. And in the evenings she spoke of her people, of songs her mother sang, of how the land remembered those who listened, and Elijah shared his own ghosts. The wife buried on a hill behind the barn, the silence that followed, the way grief could make a man invisible even to himself. Their bond did not bloom in haste, but in respect forged by shared work and shared wounds. And when riders finally came, armed men fueled by fear and lies, Ayanna stood tall despite her injury, ready to flee or fight. But Elijah stepped forward first, voice firm as he claimed her as his responsibility, his guest, his family by choice if not by blood. Tension crackled like lightning, guns half raised, until something unexpected happened. The men saw not a monster, not an enemy, but a wounded girl standing beside a man who refused to abandon her. And in that pause, conscience stirred where hatred had lived too long. Words were exchanged. Threats cooled and the riders left, not defeated by force, but by the quiet courage of standing together. That night Ayanna sat beneath the stars and told Elijah she would continue her journey to find surviving kin. And though the thought carved pain into him, he did not argue because love was not possession. And when she rose to leave at dawn, she placed her hand over his heart and said in steady English, "You did not hurt me. You saved me." And Elijah watched her walk toward the horizon, carrying strength renewed by kindness. The ranch felt different after that, not less lonely, but fuller, as if hope had taken up residence alongside memory. And Elijah knew that the West would keep breaking people. But sometimes, if a man listened closely, he could help mend a piece of it. And as the wind carried Ayanna's footsteps into legend, this story became a reminder that humanity can still rise above fear. If this tale moved you,